Protect your DNA. BioPQQ can promote formation of new mitochondria. Infowarsstore.com.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Infowars Nightly News with me, your host, Paul Joseph Watson. Coming up tonight on the show, Alex Jones interviews Francis Boyle, Harvard professor, on the upcoming attack on Iran and the preparations for it. That interview's coming up later. We start with the news in our top headline tonight. Leftist media resorts to conspiracy theories to sell Syria invasion. Desperate to sell another humanitarian invasion, the leftist media in the United Kingdom has resorted to inventing conspiracy theories about events in Syria as part of a campaign to depict President Bashar Assad's government as genocidal, while completely failing to acknowledge that the country is in a state of civil war. Now, according to the attacks on Gary Franchi and others, you're a mentally ill thought criminal if you even question the official 9/11 story. But on the other hand, it's perfectly acceptable to talk about false flag terror if you're blaming it on one of the US military-industrial complex's main targets for invasion, which of course we know is Syria. And just as they sold the humanitarian bloodbath in Libya with this liberal humanitarian caring veneer, with terrorists, of course, now ruling that country with an iron fist, Libyans tortured, put in concentration camps, the Al-Qaeda flag flying over courthouses, the liberal media again, in particular the UK Guardian and the Independent, are up to their old tricks selling this latest humanitarian war. Despite the fact that the independent Arab League report makes it clear that Syria is in a state of civil war and the opposition rebels, which the corporate media calls activists, are carrying out rocket-propelled grenade attacks, blowing up buildings, The Guardian has basically become a 24-hour rolling mouthpiece for Syrian, quote, activists with Twitter accounts blaming terrorist bombings which are killing Assad's men on Assad himself. So basically you've got the entire leftist corporate media, both in Britain and internationally, characterizing these Syrian rebels as activists when they're carrying around RPGs and conducting terror attacks that are killing scores of people. Now imagine if the Occupy Wall Street movement started walking around with RPGs and bombing government buildings. Do you think that the US media would call them, quote, activists, or would they call them terrorists? But the international corporate media will not acknowledge the fact that Syria is in a state of civil war and that there's violence on both sides. And why? Well, we know, because the fix is in for another NATO humanitarian bloodbath. The Arab League report clearly says that these opposition rebels are carrying out, quote, indiscriminate violence, and yet The Guardian still refers to them as activists and has completely prostrated itself, as I said, with a 24-hour news scroll, which is the platform for these activist tweets, which could be coming from anywhere. And then on the flip side, we've got The Independent, which came out with a story claiming that Assad's forces are killing babies, newborn babies. And this, of course, is a throwback to the manufactured tale of Saddam Hussein and the Iraqi incubator babies. You remember that one was cooked up by the US PR firm Hill and Knowlton. So we're seeing a similar situation unfold. And it, in fact, turns out that that claim about Assad killing babies comes from within the halls of the British Foreign Office itself. So just because some activist says it on Twitter and then The Independent gives it credence doesn't mean it's gospel. Patrick Henningsen on Infowars proved that it came directly from within the British Foreign Office. So again, the leftist media is manipulating their flock into supporting this war under the guise of humanitarianism, repeating precisely the same trick that we saw in Libya just a year ago. So moving on to our next story. Chinese government demands 250 million internet users provide real identities. The communist Chinese government has demanded some 250 million users of the Twitter-style microblogging platform Weibo provide their real names, addresses, and identity numbers, marking a new era of internet censorship and one that the likes of Joe Lieberman want to see enforced in the United States. And so why do they want the real names and addresses on this Chinese version of Twitter? Well, it's so people will be afraid of criticizing government officials, government atrocities, and live in fear that they'll get that knock on the door. It's a chilling effect. That's why they're doing it. And don't forget, we've featured the clip on many occasions. Joe Lieberman told CNN in 2010, we want that Chinese-style internet here in the United States. We want the kill switch in case of war. And yet, when you look at on what occasions China blocks and censors the internet, it has nothing to do with war. It has nothing to do with genuine security concerns. They habitually do it to silence dissent about government corruption or to shut people up about atrocities that the Communist Party has committed, like the recent murders in Tibet, for example. So this is what they want in America. This is what Lieberman has called for, and this is why we need to fight internet censorship in all its guises, as happened recently with the defeat of SOPA. Three headlines now that coalesce into the same issue. LAPD pioneers high-tech crime-fighting war room, reports CBS Los Angeles. We've also got out of BBC News, spying on Europe's farms with satellites and drones. And a third headline in this series, out of the Daily Mail, meet the North Dakota family of anti-government separatists busted by cops using a Predator drone after stealing 6 cows. And what do all these news stories have in common? Well, governments across the West have declared war on their own people, whether that be targeting the American people as the primary focus on the war on terror, as we've documented, or in Europe, where farmers are being targeted for what they choose to do with their own land. The common theme is, of course, the use of surveillance drone technology, once the domain of overseas occupations in hunting down insurgents. Now, farming families who have cows walk onto their property, they're the new insurgents in modern America. Farmers in Europe who don't abide by every dictatorial mandate of the unelected totalitarian European Union, they're also the new insurgents under this surveillance drone system. Of course, we also had the report 30,000 drones will be in American skies spying on US citizens within 10 years, according to the FAA. And what will they be used for? Well, if Homeland Security in their history of using these drones is anything to go by, they'll be used to repress the American people. Remember the story we covered at the end of last year? Homeland Security aided the Jamaican government in the massacre of scores of innocent people after a botched drug raid. It was a DHS drone that provided the surveillance for Jamaican authorities to go door to door, indiscriminately killing people. And of course, now we've had the announcement that DHS is planning to spend $50 million on LiDAR technology to be used in both, quote, emergency and non-emergency situations for homeland defense purposes. And what is LiDAR normally used for in this context? Hunting down insurgents in Afghanistan and Iraq. American people, you are the new insurgents, according to the Department of Homeland Security. Next story, no female TSA agents means no flight for Denver woman. This is out of Fox 31 Denver. Quote, they wouldn't let me get on the plane because I'm female, Winning said. And this is, of course, the lady who was prevented from taking her flight. She said she checked in and arrived at security about 35 minutes before the scheduled departure of her United flight. Quote, they asked if I was on the flight to Denver. I said yes. They said that they couldn't screen me because they've sent all the female TSA agents home, Winning said. A female agent was necessary because of those new pat-downs. That's right, those new pat-downs where they go directly in the pants and touch your genitalia. That's why they needed somebody, a female screener in the building, but they'd sent them all home. And so there you have it again. Another perfect reason for airports to take advantage of the recently passed provision that allows them to evict the TSA altogether and replace them with private screeners. You know, never mind Joe Lieberman and Sheila Lee Jackson whining about a new 9/11 if the TSA are evicted, because the perverted criminals who are routinely caught stealing, abusing old women and the disabled, the morons who stand next to radiation firing naked body scanners, they're really proficient in spotting the terrorists. This is the agency that trains hot dog sellers at the Super Bowl to hunt terrorists. I mean, come on, this is ridiculous. And yet people like Lieberman and Jackson are saying that the TSA is so professional, we can't possibly get rid of them, otherwise terrorists are going to hit us. And then you get all these cases where they botch it every time. Knives, swords, loaded guns almost every day. There's a story about how the TSA mess it up. And so we've got them on the ropes again. And people need to lobby their local airport because this law has now been passed. The TSA are forced to consider applications from airports to have the federal agency TSA screeners themselves kicked out and replaced by private security. So the TSA doesn't even have a female screener to get this woman through security. She misses her flight, and it's another example of the TSA's inadequacy and another reason why they should be replaced. Shyness, grieving, soon to be classified as mental illness, reports Fox News. Millions of healthy people, including shy or defiant children, grieving relatives, and people with fetishes may be wrongly labeled mentally ill by a new international diagnostic manual, specialists say. In a damning analysis of an upcoming revision of the influential Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM, psychologists, psychiatrists, and mental health experts say its new categories and tick box diagnosis systems were at best, quote, silly, and at worst, worrying and dangerous. Some diagnoses for conditions like, quote, oppositional defiant disorder and apathy syndrome risk devaluing the seriousness of mental illness and medicalizing behaviors most people would consider normal or just mildly eccentric, the experts said. And in addition to this, they're actually going to assign pedophiles and rapists with a mental disorder, which will give them the path to claim in court that, their crimes are a result of their mental illness to get more lenient sentences, while simultaneously characterizing normal behaviors, oppositional defiant disorder, as mental illnesses. And this is out of the American Psychiatric Association, APA, which is called the Bible for mental health medicine. So this is what all the establishment psychologists and psychiatrists go off. And this is precisely what the Soviets used to send dissidents to Siberian gulags. Oppositional defiant disorder. That equates to distrusting or rebelling against authority. So, if your kid doesn't bow down to the Obama worship video being played in class, as happened earlier this week in Missouri, they could be labeled mentally ill. And it's another excuse for putting millions more children on drugs like Ritalin. And as we mentioned earlier, you saw the Gary Franchi hit piece by MSNBC. 9/11 truthers are crazy. They're on drugs. Basically, they're the new neo-Nazis. Questioning the official version of 9/11 is now a thought crime. It's mental illness to distrust the state and the official story that they come out with. So they're trying to officially designate non-conformity and free thinking as a mental illness. We're talking total psychological warfare against any kind of cognitive ability to think for yourself. Essentially, they're trying to turn us all into the savage from Huxley's Brave New World. Fox Business News acts as Freedom Watch, reports Infowars.com. Fox Business Channel has cancelled one of the only shows on the entire Fox News network that was in any way informative or watchable, Freedom Watch with Judge Andrew Napolitano. In a press release distributed late Thursday, the channel announced that its entire primetime programming lineup had been changed with reruns of already existing programs replacing Freedom Watch. Napolitano's show had been airing for a year, in which time he had consistently covered major issues that other news programs would only gloss over if they devoted any coverage to them at all. Napolitano's coverage of the freedom-stripping National Defense Authorization Act, for one, was second to none as far as mainstream news output was concerned. His legal and constitutional expertise on such matters is also unrivaled. And of course, as you know, Judge Napolitano is a close friend of this show. Freedom Watch is hugely successful on YouTube. The clips on there receive tens of thousands of views on a regular basis. But, you know, this is a similar situation to Cenk Uygur, the Young Turks guy who had a show on MSNBC. Popular, the ratings were high. But his show got canned because he was directly told that people in Washington didn't like what he was doing, seeing through the left-right paradigm, talking about real issues, going after the real crux, which is precisely what Andrew Napolitano's Freedom Watch has also tried to do. So Napolitano was one of the few mainstream hosts to actually give fair coverage to Ron Paul. He was one of the only mainstream hosts to routinely expose the crimes and misdemeanors of the Federal Reserve and the TSA. But, you know, he didn't talk about celebrity pablum like Fox and Friends or some ridiculous morning show like that. He didn't engage in phony partisan bickering, so he's off the air. And Lou Rockwell, who was just a guest on this show the other day, he's encouraging people to, he's actually leading a campaign for people to contact Fox to get Freedom Watch back on the air. So if you go to the Infowars article, Fox Business News acts as Freedom Watch, you can get the contact numbers to write Fox News and demand that they get Andrew Napolitano's highly popular Freedom Watch back on the airwaves. GOP strategist Ron Paul will be on the Republican ticket. GOP strategist Jack Berkman told Fox Business host Judge Andrew Napolitano, whose show has just been cancelled, as we just discussed, that a brokered convention will force Mitt Romney to pick Ron Paul as his VP, earning Paul a place on the Republican ticket, stating that Ron Paul could still win the Republican nomination without finishing first in any of the primary caucuses. Berkman added, quote, "I'll make a bold prediction right here and right now following what we've been saying for a year. Ron Paul is going to be on the Republican ticket." Berkman said that the presence of 4 candidates for the whole race would ensure a brokered convention. Quote, "The likely leader will be Romney, but he won't have enough delegates to win," he added, forecasting that Romney would pick Paul as his VP because, quote, "Gingrich and Santorum have extremely high negatives. Nobody in their right mind would want them on the ticket." So we've had a very much mixed reaction to that story since it went up yesterday at Infowars.com. A lot of people don't like the idea of Ron Paul being secondary to Mitt Romney. They think he won't have much influence even as VP. Whereas on the other hand, people have argued that Ron Paul as vice president would represent a massive victory for the liberty movement. But still, the possibility exists that as he collects all these delegates, he could still defeat Mitt Romney. But if not, this GOP strategist, who has been accurate in the past, he predicted the demise of the campaigns of both Herman Cain and Rick Perry before they happened. He predicts Ron Paul will, at a minimum, be on the ticket, which means Romney will be forced to pick him as VP. So we'll continue to watch that one very carefully. Moving on to the quote of the day here, from our good friend David Rockefeller. Quote, "We are on the verge of a global transformation. All we need is the right major crisis and the nations will accept the new world order." And of course, that goes right to the very heart of current situation with Iran, with, of course, the potential that a crisis could be engineered, a new Gulf of Tonkin type incident to get that war going. Now, I'd encourage people here at the end of the show to sign up for prisonplanet.tv. Of course, this is the platform that we broadcast on. A lot of this material goes on YouTube, but prisonplanet.tv subscribers get live access to the show as it's streamed. They get archives going back now years to 2004. They get daily archives of the Alex Jones Show, both video and audio, speeches, special events, special interviews, just a complete library of material. And it is what funds this network. If we had no subscribers, I wouldn't be here talking to you right now. And at the moment, we've got a special, which is $44.95 for a year. That's the Give the Gift of Truth special at prisonplanet.tv. So if you're watching this on YouTube, if you want to support us in the information war, I encourage you to become a subscriber with all the great benefits it entails at prisonplanet.tv. I've been your host, Paul Joseph Watson. This is Infowars Nightly News for Friday. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Greetings, fellow Info Warriors. Alex Jones here, announcing the first of many trips that I'm going to take across this wonderful United States that we live in. And we get so busy here at Infowars.com, the nightly news, the daily radio show, the documentary films, and all the other things we're doing that I tend to never go out and give speeches anymore. And I've got a lot of ideas bubbling around in my head about the history of the New World Order, what makes them tick and how to defeat them. So I'm titling this key speech I'm going to give. It'll run around 2 hours long, Blueprint to Defeat the New World Order. And we're also going to have a surprise premiere of a short documentary film we've been working on at the event. First off, I'm going to be going to Dallas, Texas, Sunday, February 19th, 2012, to the historic Lakewood Theater. And the next Sunday, February 26th, I'm going to be in Orlando, Florida. You can find out more about the events and buy tickets at Infowars.com/events. Now, unfortunately, every event I've ever had, we've had to turn people away. So get your tickets early at Infowars.com/events. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on in this world. And the craziest of all is this explosive awakening. I can't wait to meet you and shake your hand. I'll see you in Dallas and I'll see you in Orlando. Infowars.com/events. Yeah, I'm signing these evil 1776 flags. Doesn't get any more out of control than that, ladies and gentlemen. It's pretty un-American what we're doing here at Infowars.com. I mean, not only are we promoting liberty, but we're selling 1776 flags. Now that is Al-Qaeda. Welcome back to this Friday edition of Infowars Nightly News. I want to thank Paul Watson for doing the news portion of the transmission this evening. I'll also be back this Sunday, 4 to 6 p.m. with a syndicated radio broadcast. If you don't have a local AM or FM in your area, you can simply tune into the free audio streams and video streams at Infowars.com. Now, our guest today is Professor Dr. Francis Boyle. He's had a long bio, but he's represented the government of Bosnia-Herzegovina in stopping the UN from breaking up their country. He's helped write major global U.S. bioweapons treaties. And, of course, he also has several degrees from Harvard and was given the same training in the same area as Henry Kissinger. So he's worked in close with these people. He's aware of their program, and he is a guest that we always find very informative when he comes on the radio show with us. But here he is on the Nightly News. And I wanted to get him on about the NDAA, the SOPA Act, the 30,000 drones they're funding to go in the skies, saying they're going to watch farmers with them. I mean, it is like a bad nightmare. And he studied the path to authoritarianism. And so I want to get his take historically on where he sees us going and ways to hopefully reverse this. Because along with the authoritarianism, the thugs don't just want to dominate their domestic slaves. They always look at the greener grass. They want wars, because war is the health of the state. People shut up. They do what they're told. You can have no bid contracts, and you can be big war heroes. And so now the United States, England, Europe has just been swallowed by the same type of expansionistic stuff that we saw from people like Hitler. And a lot of people, bring up Hitler. Oh, it's like Hitler. No, this really is like Hitler. Or other expansionists, Julius Caesar. I'd say Stalin, but he mainly just killed his own people and did some expansionist stuff. But it's just incredible. So he joins us to talk about that. Then I want to get into his experience with the UN up close and personal. Because some people say the UN's going to save us, and the very same military-industrial complex created it. I don't see that as the case, but we'll get Professor Boyle's take on it. Doc, it is great to have you here with us tonight. So much is going on since I talked to you a month ago. Unfortunately, everything you've written in your books warning people is coming true in spades.
Well, thank you very much for having me on, Alex. My best to your audience. Right, it looks as if we've seen the pattern here, as I said before, that after 9/11, the financial elite in America has decided to go for broke. They went to first Afghanistan, Iraq. Obama went after oil and gas in Libya. Now they are going after Syria, and it looks that will be a lead up to Iran, which could set off another world war. It's an extremely dangerous situation right now in Syria. The neoconservatives, these Straussians, have always had their eyes on Syria to knock it off. I served as legal advisor to the Syrian delegation to the Middle East peace negotiations in 1991. Now, I haven't worked for the Syrians since then, but they did ask me to draft their opening position in the peace negotiations, which would have been full peace for full withdrawal. Of course, they got nowhere with the Likud government under Shamir. But when Rabin was elected prime minister, very rapid progress was made to a comprehensive peace agreement between Israel and Syria, along the lines of the peace agreement Israel had with Egypt. So it was ready to go. And there were elections coming up in the spring of 1996, and Rabin concluded that he would present that peace treaty to the Israeli Knesset after the elections. The votes were there, but he would wait until after the elections because it was a major development. There'd be a lot of debate. And he began to run, this was late 1995, on a peace platform. He had concluded the Declaration of Principles with the Palestinians. He had a peace agreement with Jordan. He had a peace agreement in his pocket with Syria, and that then would have certainly led to a peace agreement with Lebanon. So everything could have been tied up. And then, as you know, he was murdered by his own religious fundamentalists and right-wingers over there. Netanyahu was elected prime minister, and there has been no forward progress at all since that point in time, except that the neoconservatives here in the United States have always wanted to knock off the Syrian government since then.
But they're putting Islamic, jihadi, Wahhabist types in charge now in their invasion there, the same folks they used in Libya. They're now admittedly conducting massacres and torturing the French ambassador. I mean, what's the end game after the chaos phase? I guess then round out the al-Qaeda they put in place? I mean, this is crazy.
Well, of course, we have to understand all these al-Qaeda people go back to the CIA, including bin Laden himself. So there have been long ties with the CIA from these people going back to the original Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. So we use these fundamentalists whenever we think it is useful, as in Libya and now in Syria. And yes, the agenda in the case of Syria is simply to destabilize Syria and perhaps crack it up into its constituent units, as they did with Afghanistan, as they've done with Iraq, as they've done with Libya, and just break it up into small little pieces short of a nation state that really then cannot stand in the way of the objectives of the United States, Britain, France, Israel. Remember, France was a former colonial power here. It's ridiculous to think that they could care less about human rights in Syria. And the same way with Turkey. Before France, Turkey was a former colonial power. So they're all working together, and they're happy to use these Muslim fundamentalists. Indeed, today's Financial Times has a big story about how we are now shifting all the Muslim fundamentalists in Libya that overthrew a nationalist regime there under Gaddafi. we're now transferring them over to Syria. So it's very clear it's the same people, same agenda.
And then separately saying we've got to have 30,000 drones in the skies, highway checkpoints, TSA getting in our space, groping us because Al-Qaeda is going to get us. And then they're using the very Al-Qaeda to commit assassinations and bombings in Iran. They just play the public like the public's totally ignorant. And I guess because the media has played along with the deception, the public is ignorant. It's just, it's so absurdist that we're told, give our rights up, Al-Qaeda will get us, and Al-Qaeda across the board is this clandestine CIA, Mossad, MI6 secret army, same type folks they used to overthrow Mossadegh in 53. You and I know the history, you to a greater extent in many cases than I. It's just cartoonishly obvious. Now, let me raise this point since you brought this up. I was rereading, for whatever reason this morning, because I saw it again, exactly what that editor of that big Jewish newspaper said last month in Atlanta, where he said, you know, I've talked to Mossad people, and it's being discussed killing Obama if he doesn't get behind this war. And then I'm not a fan of Obama, obviously, but I'm seeing this pressure. There's different camps in there. I mean, this is our president regardless. And and then I was watching some other news articles out of Israel with like major right-wing rabbis saying, shut up, America, do what we say, you know, we don't care, we're going to attack, and what the editor said was great, you know, we'll do what we have to. I mean, to use the word chutzpah, there's almost like, it's crazy land, because they're trying to start World War III, the military-industrial complex, the contractors want it, but the generals don't want it. And then I get emails and calls and things, and I'm pretty much neutral on Israel. I want Israel to be peaceful and happy. I'm not anti-Israel. And I get threats now. You better shut up and get behind this traitor. I mean, it's really creepy to watch because reading what the editor said and others, it shows a level of confidence that is frightening, because it is obviously insane. And I know that's a rant. It's just that you can feel World War III. You can see it. The Russians are sending in Spetsnaz. The Iranians are sending in troops. Nuclear weapons are getting moved around. The Chinese are saying brace for war. Even in the Cold War, I've studied it. You lived it. I've never seen rhetoric like this. I mean, it's just crazy. What's your view on that rant?
Well, I think it is. It's extremely dangerous. As I discussed with you in our last interview 2 weekends ago, we sent a U.S. aircraft carrier strike force through the Straits of Hormuz and basically dared the Iranians to carry out their threat to shut the Strait of Hormuz. Fortunately, the Iranians were sensible enough not to do it. Last summer, as you know, we backed up South Korea shelling in North Korean territorial waters, even when the North Koreans had said they would retaliate, and we were fully prepared and on standby for an all-Korean war. Fortunately, the Chinese encouraged the North Koreans not to retaliate. And then under Bush, as you know, we encouraged Georgia to attack South Ossetia, knowing full well there were Russian troops there. And they were killing Russian troops with our arms, equipment, supplies, and support. And I guess they figured that Russia would not respond, but Putin did. And when Putin did respond and was about to overrun Tbilisi, the United States government under Bush basically cut away Saakashvili. And fortunately, Putin decided to stop short of Tbilisi. So there we have 3 instances recently, going back to 2008, where the tinder for a world war could have been set off. And Syria could do it too. As you know, there are Russian warships right now there in the Syrian port of Tartus, to serve as a tripwire and to dissuade any type of NATO invasion or an attack. And of course, what's going on now in Iran, there are 3 aircraft carrier task forces soon off Iran, and we have one off of Syria.
Dr. Boyle, going back to my earlier statement and question, just specifically, to have a newspaper editor of a major Jewish newspaper say he's talking to Mossad and other Israelis and they're discussing killing Obama if he doesn't get behind an attack on Iran, that for me is pretty much an open threat and really shows the confidence of some of the Likudniks. And I've seen statements in the Washington Times that they've talked to top people and that Netanyahu knows it's going to be a big war, but that he thinks that he'll come out like Churchill, that once the West is committed to this big war, that he's going to be some type of hero. But as you said, other interest, in the United States, England, and Europe, they're moving weapon systems and ships to Asia, openly menacing. So it's not just Israel; it's the global empire, the Anglo-American establishment, whatever you want to call it, is attempting to start wider wars. But then you ask the question, okay, if you wanted one on 888, why didn't you go ahead and give the Russians the big war if you were going to go ahead and test them? So it's really frightening. Do you think Obama is being blackmailed, or do you think that may have been a threat when they said, hey, we can kill you if you don't do what we want?
Right. Whether you support Obama or not is not the issue. He is our president, and he did win a democratic election by the American people. He's legitimately in power there. And we certainly can't tolerate or support him being assassinated by anyone, especially by a foreign government. And the reason this rhetoric is so dangerous is that this was exactly the same type of rhetoric we saw in Israel before Prime Minister Rabin was assassinated to prevent the Syrian peace treaty. So, yes, this has to be taken quite seriously here in the United States. And also, if you follow the Israeli press in English, which I do, the language over there is deplorable. But the same thing happened on Rabin, and that is why we have to take it very seriously. I understand the Secret Service is investigating this fellow, but I suspect he is only the tip of the iceberg. And
this has got to be discussed on a very wide scale for him to feel confident enough to come out and say, I'm talking to people in Mossad and this is being discussed. I mean, even if they were planning something like that, why would he be shooting his mouth off? It shows just a crazed confidence. Or was it a way to threaten Obama?
It was probably both. It was an implicit threat to Obama that if he stands in the way of a war against Iran, he could be assassinated, and also simply the arrogance of power. That fortunately we can rely on that some people are so arrogant with power that they tip their hand and they go too far. So
wow.
we have to take this threat quite seriously, because it was the same type of rhetoric that preceded the murder and assassination by Rabin all over Israel, and Likud was actively participating in that rhetoric and it basically inciting the murder and assassination of Rabin to prevent a peace treaty with Syria and any further development of a peace process. And I can assure you, being at the Middle East peace negotiations, I advised both the Palestinians and the Syrians. We could have had peace and this whole issue wrapped up peacefully if Rabin had not been assassinated, had won that election, had concluded that peace treaty with Syria, moved on to Lebanon, and then a final agreement with the Palestinians. That could have all been done, by I don't mean to speak quickly here, but certainly the peace treaty with Syria was ready to go in late 1995.
What is Likud's, for people that haven't studied it like you, a person who's been involved in all this, What does Likud really stand for? I mean, do they just want to keep basically a quasi-military state in Israel where they can get their no-bid contracts and things, kind of like our military-industrial complex?
Well, they want the whole West Bank, all of Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights for starters. Whether they really want to move on to Jordan from there, I can't say. As you know, the sentiments in Israel is like, let's also move on to Jordan. Some of them do believe that Jordan is given to them by God as well. But I think Likud right now just wants all that territory to themselves, and all the rest is simply rhetoric. As long as Likud was in power, there was never any good faith negotiations with anyone under these peace negotiations, sponsored, by the way, by the United States government. It really took place under Rabin and Labor. And remember, Rabin was a general, and I think I'm not saying he was necessarily a highly principled man, but he was strategic, and he could view it as a military situation that peace was in Israel's interest. So let's cut a deal here. But he was offed. That was that, and that is the dangers with this rhetoric, these threats to Obama. It happened to Rabin. It could happen to Obama, sure. And of course, I deplore that. But you could imagine the chaos that would be set off in this country if the president were to be assassinated by anyone.
Well, obviously, it's going to be a USS Liberty or Lavon affair type deal. I mean, if the Mossad or somebody did kill Obama, they're going to make it look like Arabs did it or some right-wing group here domestically. I mean, I don't see elements in Israel killing Obama and then actually taking the blame themselves for it. What's your view on that statement?
Well, we do know that in the first bombing of the World Trade Center, not the 9/11 one, there was a Mossad agent running it by the code name of Cindy. You can even read that in the New York Times. And she disappeared. No one knows what happened to her. So I think you're right that they will not do this directly. They would use Arabs or others as front people and stand back. Right.
So, I mean, Obama is
a Manchurian candidate type of person. They would get. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, Obama is losing value by the minute for the establishment. We know that there's all those Likudniks and eargun people all in his office. And if I was President Obama, I mean, I would be concerned because, I mean, these folks have shown they will take action. They're not usually shooting their mouths off. And let me tell you, I'm actually worried about Obama because that could be a false flag. I've always said killing Obama could be a false flag. And it can be done by, any of these special interest groups. I don't have an obsession, with blaming Israel and perseverating all day, but you've got to point out, you've got to be honest, Israel right now is at the center of the storms that are swirling around and demanding this Iran situation. And let me tell you, folks, if Obama does get killed, immediately just don't go with the official story that it's Arabs or whatever.
Right. I think it would be a catastrophe if anything were to happen to Obama, and we would see a massive escalation of the police state here in the United States as well. So it's a very dangerous situation indeed. I saw on the wire services this morning that someone was just apprehended in an alleged plot to kill Obama. Again, whatever you think of him or even Bush Jr., they are our presidents, and we cannot be conducting politics here by having our leaders murdered. I still personally remember the tragedy after President Kennedy, and we really don't know who was behind the assassination of President Kennedy and precisely why.
Sure.
Obviously, that's still debated.
But here's an example. You're on a no-fly list for suing the government and things for violating civil rights. You're harassed, and you're a prestigious guy, held a lot of top positions, and then meanwhile, this editor over here, he should have been immediately arrested and should have been questioned, not just by the Secret Service, the FBI. Okay, you wrote in a newspaper, you're meeting with the Mossad, and the murder of a U.S. president's being discussed. I was rereading that this morning. I was reading the original paper, looking at it. I'm like, this is crazy. And the guy's out walking around. You have trouble getting on an airplane for no reason. This guy can say, I'm talking to the Mossad, and they're discussing killing the president. And then he's not in trouble. It's wild.
Well, obviously, people like that have very high-level protection in the CIA, in the FBI, in the Secret Service, in the Department of Justice, in Department of Homeland Security. Remember, certainly under Bush Jr., neocons were put in power in all these agencies. So you are correct. He has protection somewhere to be able to get away with this.
Yeah, because he didn't just say option is somebody could kill Obama. He said, yeah, we're having meetings about this, and this is don't think I'm joking. Option 3. This is this is a real option here, and we're looking at it. I mean, that's like, whoa, a guy saying he's representing a foreign country, and let's look at killing the president. And it's like, oh, well, he resigned. It's okay. 2 final questions, and then any other key tidbits that you'd like to relay to people, Dr. Boyle. We really appreciate your time, and also wanted to tell folks about your books here at the end. But a lot of experts, as you said, all these generals are coming out. Former head of the Mossad's come out. A lot of Israeli generals have said it's a catastrophe, a disaster, could start World War III. I mean, it runs from bad to worse, the whole gambit, but none of it's good. It just goes from disaster to Armageddon. Literal Armageddon, all of this going on, and it's just still moving forward. The troops are massing. The case is being sold just like 2002, 2003 in the March lead up. It's all here, but from your perspective, why is an attack on Iran so disastrous, and why do you think the power structure would be leaning towards doing it?
Well, of course, we also have to understand that the American power elite very well might be considering just sacrificing Israel and its people to let Israel start the attack on Iran, using Israel as their attack dog, which Israel always has been, and then suffer the consequences from the Iranian retaliation, and then we get in there and take out what's left. So it could be, broader than the notion that Israel runs the United States, I don't find very credible. They do pretty much what we tell them to do. Not all the time, not everywhere. But we're the ones really behind the show here. And it could be that we are setting them up to be sacrificed, to take out Iran, and then we will pick up the pieces, which is all that oil and gas in Iran, and complete control and domination of the entire Persian Gulf and Central Asia as well. And this is exactly what Brzezinski recommended in his book, The Grand Chessboard. If you read his Grand Chessboard, it's all in there. So that pretty much is the strategy. It has little to do with Democrats versus Republicans. That's Tweedledum versus Tweedledee. This is the power elite that runs this country. As I said, after 9/11 and the anthrax attacks, they are going for broke to control and dominate the world. And they're going to grab all the oil and gas they can, everywhere they can, and literally break up any states that stand in their way or that have created them problems for them before. Indeed, Wolfowitz, the neocon, had me at actually was at the University of Chicago when I was there, said this after 9/11. Publicly, he said, we are going to start to break up states. And the first state they broke up was Afghanistan, then Iraq, now Libya, looks like Syria, and then Iran.
But Wesley Clark said that too. He's talked about, he was in the meeting and they said, yeah, we're going after these 8 countries. And
I think that's what the Pentagon, apparently Wesley Clark was at the Pentagon, and that's what they told him. And when Wolfowitz said, we're going to be breaking up states, he was deputy to Rumsfeld. He was the #2 guy in the Pentagon. So that simply confirms what I'm saying. Yes, that's the agenda here. And what is going on, all these states have control of oil and gas and transportation modes for oil and gas. And regretfully, most of them are Muslim. So for that reason, here in the United States, we use Muslims as scapegoats and boogeymen, which is also what we've seen after 9/11. Kind of like what the Nazis did to the Jews. Everyone needs a scapegoat. We have our scapegoat. It's the Muslims here in America, like commies under the bed when I was growing up, and they're the Muslims over there.
Well, I totally agree with you because, I mean, all this stuff, in academic papers is really public. There's kind of the mainstream news that we're all fed, and then there's the establishment communicating with itself. And, I knew this a year ago because of family in the military, but the U.S. is planning the attack. They plan to let Israel start it, take the attack, be the victim. Netanyahu's even bragged in the Washington Times that then he thinks the Israelis will rally around him, even if they don't like him because they're under attack, even though they start it. He'll say he has to. And then the big one that you mentioned, they're going to then use it as a domestic crackdown. And I believe Iran will attack Israel through proxies. That's a no-brainer. But I believe the establishment, and I see them gearing up, is going to stage attacks in Europe, the U.S., and England, and use it to crack down on civil liberties and further expand it. You see them lining up for it. They are gearing up every agency of government for war with the people. It is disgusting.
Vice President Cheney already publicly stated that they were going to blame the next major terrorist attack here in the United States on Iran, no matter who was responsible. So you're certainly correct. There will probably be some type of false flag attack. Blame it on Iran. Use it as justification for war against Iran. Of course, Congress will salute and ship out. We very well might get a formal declaration of war, which we do not have now. But if there is a formal declaration of war by Congress, you might as well kiss the Constitution goodbye. There's an entire title of the United States Code that automatically gets activated and makes the President of the United States of America a constitutional dictator, just like FDR was during World War II. We have not been in that situation yet, although we do know after 9/11, Bush did ask Congress to give him a formal declaration of war, and they refused to do so. They gave him a limited authorization to use military force.
But he showed them with the anthrax attack. He showed them with the anthrax attack a month later.
That's correct. They also had the USA Patriot Act, which is the blueprint for the U.S. police state. That was being held up in Congress by Senators Leahy and Daschle, and all of a sudden they got hit with super weapons-grade anthrax coming from illegal U.S. military stockpiles. And media sources also got hit to make it clear to the media that they better not be going after this story. So the media have already always go along with the cover-up on the anthrax. Yes.
Yeah, look, Dan Rather got some. It was all their enemies. The guys that took photos of Bush's daughters drunk here in Austin, they got hit.
Right. It was clearly an attempt to terrorize and intimidate the media. Not that they needed all that much intimidation to begin with, since they very rarely report the truth.
Is there any way to defeat this premeditated constellation of evil? I guess the general public has to stop being naive and realize that we have no future if we don't stand up against this. But I'm afraid, Dr. Boyle, it's going to go the way of Germany. People are going to have see the empire, launch World War III, invade all these countries, and then either this empire of evil will succeed or it's going to implode, and then we're going to get invaded by the Chinese. And people say, oh, that'll never happen. Well, if World War III starts and there's nuclear war, my God, I can just feel the gates of hell opening up in front of us.
Well, I'm afraid you're right. You know, if you read Huntington's Clash of Civilization, Huntington was ahead of me at Harvard. I went through the same program that produced that monster. And it does appear that the State Department the U.S. government has been following the blueprint set forth by Huntington in that article, later followed by a book. First take out the Arab and Muslim world, and then move on to China. And at the end of Huntington's book, it concludes with a nuclear war between the United States and China. And that gets into the deployment of all these ABM systems in Europe and around China, in Japan, Korea, whatever. If we strike first, these ABM systems are designed to pick up whatever might be left that the Russians and the Chinese send back at us.
And again, the Chinese president comes out and says, prepare for war with the U.S. I mean, our government is not moving all the nukes over there to play. I mean, it's insane. It is shocking to know America's been captured by evil, and that we now, Dr. Boyle, we are living in an aggressive, crazy empire that's got super weapons. I don't know. I mean, thank God the military has been blowing the whistle about the fake Iranian ambassador stuff and all the rest of it, and hopefully cooler heads will prevail. I mean, I've never been for a military coup because those are so dangerous, because you can get something just as bad, and I'm not endorsing that now, but I mean, you know, is there an Operation Valkyrie out there to stop this? Well, you can't, because it's not just a president. It's not Adolf Hitler. It's a whole crew of crooks in every position. How do you stop a cult of criminals that are power mad?
Well, I think you're right that the military, there are sensible people in there, unlike these neocons who are completely irrational, and they understand the consequences of what's happening. And we have to have more people, for example, like Admiral Fallon, who was head of U.S. Central Command and just publicly stated an attack on Iran was not going to happen on his watch. The military they take an oath to uphold the Constitution and laws of the United States of America, and they have an obligation under the Uniform Code of Military Justice to refuse to carry out illegal and unconstitutional orders. And I think, obviously, you can't really expect, people at the bottom of the pyramid there, but I would hope that, people near the top of the military just start making it clear they are not going to carry out these orders because they believe they're either illegal, unconstitutional, or fatally dangerous. That is one hope we have. Meanwhile, we citizens simply have to get organized. We still have our First Amendment rights. We need protests, demonstrations, civil resistance, organization in these elections. Whatever can be done to head off this catastrophe. We are not the Weimar Republic. We're far from it. But it's clear we're moving in that direction. And I don't know how much time we have. I agree with you on that.
Well, and the system knows once they've got a big war going, they can move us way past the Weimar Republic quickly. Right.
Once they get a formal declaration of war, we've all had it. It'll be just like what happened to Japanese Americans in World War II. The Korematsu case, and the Korematsu case is still good law. It's never been overturned by the United States Supreme Court. And indeed, officials of the Bush Jr. administration publicly stated that Korematsu is still good law. And we know that FEMA has the internment camps ready to go. So all they need is a formal declaration of war, and that'll be it.
Yeah, I saw a former CIA director on TV once say, just round up all Muslims, put them in camps in America. And that was a couple of years after 9/11.
Well, and that was the plan that Attorney General Ed Meese had. They had a plan at the Department of Justice to do that, and they were setting up camps to do that. I didn't go see the camps myself, but I do know people I work with who went out and saw these camps in the late 1980s, and they are there. I believe they've now been taken over by FEMA.
No, they have been. Yeah, that's Rex 84. Now, in closing, as you've already given us 35 minutes, Dr. Boyle, we really appreciate the time. I want to talk about some of your latest books and things that are available, and tell folks the titles of those. Very, very scholarly, but also riveting reading, because it is such veritas. Specifically, an example of what one guy can do, though. You did represent a major bloc of the Balkans and was able to stop the UN in the West from breaking up Bosnia-Herzegovina and causing a new giant civil war and ethnic cleansing. That's on the record. And so it's an insight into what one guy can do, standing up and being moral, but it's also an example of the type of behavior we see from the UN and others. So briefly, tell folks that story, and then tell us about, of all the books you've written, what you think the most important reading is.
Well, for our current situation here in America, I've written 2 books that I think could get people oriented, and that would be Tackling America's Toughest Questions, Clarity Press, and then the second, Protesting Power, War, Resistance, and Law. How to use law and the Constitution to oppose further warfare here by the United States government and a police state. So I've written 15 books, but I think those would be the 2 most relevant to our current plight. And indeed, that's why I wrote those 2 books, to try to provide some light and a direction out of where we are now. Yes, as for Bosnia, sure, the United Nations and the European Union were going to carve them up into 3 little pieces, rob them of the United Nations membership, destroy them as a state, and subject 1.5 million to 2 million more Bosnians to ethnic cleansing. We already had 2 million Bosnians subjected to ethnic cleansing. And behind these plans were, of course, the Clinton administration, Mrs. Clinton, now the Secretary of State, many people working for Obama today, and Mrs. Clinton used to work for President Bill Clinton, and the British and the French. They were and the Russians as well. But they were fully prepared to simply destroy this state and wipe out all of its people. And the UN bureaucracy, all their lawyers, went along with it. And so I could just say from my personal experience, I was Bosnia's ambassador to the World Court. I stopped this from happening. But the UN bureaucracy, bureaucrats, these people are completely rotten, corrupt, despicable, unprincipled, and fortunately mediocre. All their lawyers, politicians, diplomats are pretty mediocre people. But you certainly can't trust them. And number 2, however, I think we have to understand, I know there's people who in good faith believe the UN is going to take us over, or UN helicopters. The UN does what we tell them to do. If Mrs. Clinton calls up Ban Ki-moon, he hops to it and says, jump, he says, how high? And the same way with his predecessor, we got these people the jobs. So they use the UN as a cutout for what their agenda is, as they did on Libya, as they just tried to do on Syria, as they've tried to do on Iran.
Sure. I mean, the imperial forces need this quasi-democratic thing that the Security Council really dictates. And of course, I mean, the military-industrial complex created it in 45 with all these promises at Presidio, based there in San Francisco. And I'm not saying the UN is going to take America over. It's that these imperial, globalist, corporate, fascist forces that created it are trying to transfer powers into it because it's their puppet to then come in, like take here at the local level and jack up taxes, to basically give it to, corporate entities like GE. And then, yes, then the UN takes the blame. But you're right. It's a total cutout.
it's a cutout, and they're not going to give up power themselves. But they use the UN as a cutout. So I don't think there are proxies, there are stooges, there are agents, and we have to look at them that way. The whole bureaucracy there at the UN, they simply can't be trusted. But the real decisions get made in Washington, London, Paris, Brussels for the UN.
Yeah. In closing, if you notice, the generals, the colonels I talked to, the CIA people that were actually in combat in Vietnam, people that live in the real world, they're all against these wars, the drones, the police state, the NDAA. And a lot of these people, like you were saying, aren't completely moral or perfect or even good guys. They live in the real world. And so the entire military is against all these wars and where we're going. Kind of like the German military didn't want to go into Russia. Not that they were even good. It's just that they were living in the real world. Hitler wasn't. He hadn't actually been at a command level. He'd been low level in the trenches, but at least he was military to a certain extent. Now we have all these academics and people who understand statecraft, deception, manipulation, but they still don't understand the real nuts and bolts. And so you have the bureaucratic elite and the corporate owners who are becoming more and more detached from reality and who make 40-to-1 bets, like Corzine, trying to command a military and a huge system through their arrogance to launch something. And I know they're watching these shows, at least their minions are. They need to understand there's a reason the military's against this here and in Israel. There's a reason the British military's against it, because they're living in the real world. And it is so creepy. I mean, hundreds of years ago, the problem was the generals wanted wars because they'd be superstars, and the politicians had to hold them back. Now it's the other way around. The politicians are so crazy, they want to launch wars that are so huge and so dangerous, even the generals don't want a part of it. I mean, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I think that, the military is used by these elites. If you read Kissinger, he had nothing but contempt for them, for the generals and the rest of them. He couldn't care less. And I think that's true for the elites, Mrs. Clinton, all the rest of them. Their children, their husbands, they don't serve in the military. So as far as they see it, they're just sort of a mercenary throwaway class to be used as they see fit.
Yeah, Kissinger called them dumb animals.
That's correct. And that, I went through the same program at Harvard that produced Kissinger, Brzezinski, Huntington, Schelling, all the rest of them. That's their attitude towards the military. They're supposed to do what they're told to do. And I think, at least the military understands the consequences of these decisions. Again, we had a very courageous guy like Admiral Fallon say there would be no war against Iran on his watch.
Well, Mullen went over to Israel and in a public speech said, you guys stage the USS Liberty. Don't do that again. This was an incredible shot against the bow. That means the Pentagon has intel that the Likudniks are looking to stage something.
That's true. I, for a period of time, was counsel to the Liberty survivors. My dad was a Marine who invaded Saipan, Tini, and Okinawa in World War II. The Marines are part of the Navy. And it's very clear Israel attacked the Liberty as part of a false flag attack. They were going to sink it and kill everyone and blame it on the Egyptians or the Syrians, the Arabs, to get us directly involved in that war. And fortunately, because of the great courage and heroism of the men of the Liberty, who, by the way, had no weapons, but they kept that ship afloat and survived and were able to tell the story. And yet, despite that, Israel and the neocons have so much power in Congress and the courts that no matter what we've tried to do to get justice for them, we've been completely shut down now since 1967. Now, I want to make it clear, I no longer represent them. They have another lawyer. He's giving it a try, but it doesn't look too good. I mean, we're talking 1967 here. This is over 45 years later. Many of these men are dying off, and I guess the theory is they'll all die off and the matter will disappear. but it was clearly a false flag attack. And President Johnson and Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, when planes were mobilized on the Sixth Fleet to go rescue the Liberty from the Israeli attack, McNamara called them all back. And in my opinion, having studied this matter and researched the statutes, clearly McNamara should have been prosecuted for treason, as defined by the United States Constitution. People use the word treason all the time. It's incorrect. There's a formal, technical, legal word definition of treason set forth in the Constitution and in a United States statute. I researched this for the Liberty vets. Clearly, McNamara, who I take it was already acting pursuant to orders from President Johnson, committed treason against the United States of America and the Liberty vets. And here we are 45 years later, and they have no justice, no recognition. And it shows you the power of the Israel lobby here in the United States, in Congress, in the news media, to still cover this up.
Well, you're a constitutional lawyer, but this is in closing. I mean, for me, I've read the statutes on treason. It's when you aid a foreign military power against your own forces, or you try for a foreign power to overthrow your government. I mean, treason is opening the gate to let the enemy in. The ship's under attack. They're begging for help for hours. The jets are taking off. And I've talked to the generals and the admirals. In fact, a lot of them have died since I had them on. Who were there and were on the radio phone and said, I want to talk to the president. And even I'm going from memory, but yeah, the president even came on the line and said, yes, we're not going to have an incident, recall those planes. And it's just amazing to see that definition. I mean, I'm correct in a layman's definition of treason, correct?
I think the Liberty, having researched it a while ago, my conclusion and the advice I gave them when I was serving as counsel to them was that McNamara definitely had committed treason as defined by the United States Constitution, and there is a statutory definition of treason further specifying it, yes.
Wow. All right. Well, Professor Boyle, that was a great 50-minute interview. I meant to do 15 minutes, but it's always riveting talking to you. God bless you, and I hope we turn this around so we don't end up being political prisoners. I think if they start trying to round folks up, though, down the road, even in a war, I don't think everybody's going to line up and do what they're told. It's just quite a mess we're headed into.
I'm afraid it is, and all we can do is keep struggling. And those two books I mentioned will try to give your listeners some information and background and materials that they can use to formulate their own opinion and their own conscience as to what they should do now. Right, because we're facing a World War III and a military police state right in the face here. And remember, there's an election in 2012. We could have another October surprise. If it looks like Obama's losing, maybe the only way he could win would be to launch an attack on Iran or Syria.
Well, a year ago, the neocons were in the papers saying, get behind an Iran attack and we'll leave you alone, we'll support you. I mean, it's all an open conspiracy against liberty. And for good old boys out there that are like, oh, I'm behind killing the Iranians at a tribal level, they need to understand the globalists don't care about the Iranians or us either. When freedom goes, we're all going to get hammered by this. Thank you so much, Dr. Boyle.
All right. Thanks a lot, Alex. Have a good week.
Thank you. Yeah, have a great weekend. Wow, that was an amazing interview. Great job to the crew. And I will, Lord willing, see you back this Sunday, 4 to 6 p.m. with the radio show, and back Monday, of course, with Infowars Nightly News. And that is it for myself and the crew. Great job, folks, and great job to all the subscribers out there. If you're watching elsewhere on the web and want to support us and see it when it first airs and all the archives and 9 years of material, prisonplanet.tv or InfoWarsNews.com. We've got a 15-day free trial running right there.